Hello. My Google's been so slow today. Can you hear me? Okay.
Hello, everybody. Hi, Jordan and Marvin.
Yes.
Hello.
All right. I believe it is 6:30, and Matt Campbell did let me know that he would not be available to participate this evening. So I see that Burl and Brian are here. So the school board member representatives are in attendance. Welcome to the December 15th Finance and Facilities Committee meeting. And before we launch into the items for discussion, I just think it would be appropriate to take a moment of silence. We lost one of our students today, and I think if we honor his passing. Okay. We have 6 items on the agenda. We are going to move around the order a bit because we have 2 representatives from Baker Tilly with us, and I'm sure Marvin Founds and Jordan Peters would rather do something else with the rest of their evening. So if we can focus on number 4, the debt issuance piece, and I'll turn it over to Mr. Berlingo to do the introductions and take it from there.
Yeah, so as Daphne, Ms. Moore indicated, Mr. Founds and Ms. Peters, we've been working with Baker Tilly for, I'm not sure how far back the relationship goes, Marvin, but they've been assisting us as investment advisors since the beginning of this process. And they are going to present some information relative to the upcoming bond issue. Relative to the millage, we have 2 issues that we are basically will be offering this come February, target date to sell bonds, one for the bond issue, the other for the COPS, which are certificates of participation backed by the PI levy that was approved by the voters. So they're going to give some information relative to those 2 different vehicles.
All right, thank you. And yes, we've been working with the school district since 2017. So it was prior to the last new issue. And really at that time, there was discussion about potentially this follow-up issue for the high school. And so there was some planning going on even at that time with regard to this potential issue that we now have in front of us and the district's been successful with at the ballot. The first item we wanted to talk about is the bond millage itself that will be set for next year. And it is that time of the year where the county is setting the millage for collection purposes in 2021. And as we've been discussing with the district and the district has known for some time, there was going to be an update process this year with assessed valuation. As I think everybody knows at this point, this was a very good year for that as far as increase in assessed valuation. So when the millage was calculated, that was associated with the 205 issue on the ballot, the current assessed valuation in 2020 was required to be used. And that millage that was associated with the $205 million project was 4.93 mils. However, knowing that the assessed valuation was going to most likely increase for this coming collection year, there was discussion early on in the process that most likely the district would not need to collect that full millage amount of 4.93 mils because there would be a higher base to apply the millage. And so therefore you would not need to have the millage at 4.93 when it came time for the collection. The other thing that's occurring is one of the existing series of debt is expiring at the end after the year 21. So there's a part of the millage that's being collected presently that will no longer be needed for the existing debt. So you have two things that we're working in favor of the school district and the taxpayers, and that is the increase in assessed valuation and existing millage declining because of debt falling off. That was going to help then offset the increase in millage that would take place because of this new issue. So as mentioned, it's time for that communication to take place with the county auditor. Mr. Berlingo will need to confirm that with the county. And we are able to share the screen to pull up a couple of documents. We'll have Jordan do that if she can. And Jordan, if you want to pull up, I put together a quick chart regarding this conversation as far as the existing millage that's being collected in 2020 and what it may look like in 21 and also 22 and 23. And then we have a larger report to take a look at, but this will just get the basic concept in front of you. So here what we're showing is collection year 20, 21, 22, and that should be 23 to the far right. Apologize for that. And then the rows are showing the existing debt and then the new debt that's coming on because of the November 2020 issue. We would refer to that as the 21 issue. And then it'll show the total bond millage and then the increase over the prior year. So for collection year 2020, there 2.15 mils were being collected for bond retirement fund purposes for the existing debt. Going into 21, there will not need to be as much collected for the existing, is expected to drop to 1.95. The estimated amount in one of the scenarios we're going to look at here in a couple of minutes would suggest that the new issue would only require 3.71 mils in collection year 21. So the total bond millage to be collected could only be 5.6 mils, which is a 3.51 increase over the 2021 collection year. So instead of the increase being the millage that was associated to the ballot issue at the amount of 9.3 being the increase would be expected to be 3.51. And again, the reason for that, as you can see, some of it is due to the existing debt declining slightly, but the rest of that is due to the increase in assessed valuation. And then as we look at 2022, potentially the existing debt could decline by about 1 mil. And at that time, then the district could increase the millage required for the 21 issue as we structure the repayment. As the district structures the repayment, it could require 4.7 mils for the new issue. In total, though, the millage stays the same. So the the increase to the taxpayer in 22 would be 0. And you can see 23, again, that final column is 23 estimate. So we would expect then the millage to stay at that 5.66. As I said, we'll get into a couple other charts here, but just wanted to set the base here for the concept of how this could look. Any questions on that? Okay. And so from here, sure, we can pull up the other report. From here, the one pager. On the A and B. on this sheet, look a little more specific at a couple options as far as how the debt could be repaid. There's still planning to take place, decision to be made when it comes to the actual structuring of the debt, the repayment of the debt. The millage for this first year needs to be set now. As you know, the debt will not be sold, the bonds will not be sold, won't have final pricing until first quarter of 21, but we have to, the district needs to set the millage now. So we're using some assumptions as to what may take place with the final bond sales. As we can scroll back up to the top, Jordan, I'll just cover real quickly. This first item, since there's a B, we should probably explain the A. And the A is 205 million, the bond issue. We're only talking about the bond issue at this point. The 205 million amount that was approved on the ballot. Typically, the school district would issue all of it tax exempt. That's the lowest cost of borrowing for the school district. That would be the first approach to take for the school district. But with tax exempt debt, there comes spending requirements because of federal tax law, and the requirements to spend money within a certain amount of time comes with issuing tax exempt debt. Because of the timeline that the district may be pursuing for planning eventual build out, the district may not be able to meet all of those requirements. So we then look at option B, start looking at some other options. And because of the current environment, tax exempt debt, as I mentioned, most favorable, lowest cost of borrowing for the school district. The other option for the school district is issuing taxable debt that does not require the same spending requirements. And so therefore there is not a timeline in which the school district's required to spend the taxable debt. So more recently, school districts, other tax exempt issuers of debt have taken the option of looking at taxable. Interest rates are at low levels. And so the decision for the school district to make is, should the district go ahead and lock in interest rates today, even though taxable is slightly higher, in order to take the interest rate risk off the table that potentially, if the district waits, tax exempt rates could increase and possibly end up costing more. So we look at this option as one for the school district to consider, but also as a conservative estimate in order to set the millage for 2021. So here we use about half and half, the issue tax exempt and taxable, 105 tax exempt and 100 million taxable, in order to estimate what the repayment might look like over time. And again, especially the requirement in this first year. So this 566 and 51 should look familiar from the prior chart we covered. Though we also want to take into account what the actual cost is to the taxpayer. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jordan for her to walk through. We highlight the green is what the ballot millage would have cost the taxpayer per 100,000. I think that's what the district used, and most schools do use the per 100,000 as an estimate for taxpayers and voters to understand how much the new issue may cost. So in green, we've identified that cost, but then in yellow, we're identifying the net increase to the taxpayer when taking into consideration the lower millage than the 4.93 and their increase in property value. So Jordan.
Before Jordan takes over, can everybody that's not speaking put your mute button on for the quality of the?
Yeah. Marvin, I just have a quick question. So when you said the requirements the district can't meet, those requirements are draw schedule as we're planning this project, right? It's going to take some time. And so the first year in the draw schedule that we were looking at would have been 25 million, and it would be very difficult for us to meet those requirements. Is that what you mean by
Yes.
requirements?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
And this is Jordan. I am here. Unfortunately, I'm having some technical difficulties with my video, but I am here and smiling and pleased to be here this evening with you all. So as Marvin was saying, as we are looking at the millage, we're also cognizant of the effect to taxpayers and the information that the district provided throughout the planning process. And as such, the 4.93 on a home worth $100,000 in 2020, that cost would have been $173, highlighted in green here. Marvin addressed the fact that valuations did increase for 2021, and looking at what the impact to residential taxpayers was, on average, the home values went up approximately 18 to 19% in the district. And so a home that was worth $100,000 in 2020, in 2021 would be approximately $119,000. And so we wanted to look at that impact, not only from a millage perspective, but an increase in home value perspective as well. In using the 3.51 overall increase that Marvin discussed previously, for the homeowner with a $100,000 home, that would only be a net increase of about $146, meaning that the increase, despite what is occurring with the assessed valuation, would be approximately $30 lower than what was used on the ballot millage of 4.93. The other opportunity that the district has through this process is to potentially shorten the life of the issue and save on interest cost overall. But what that does potentially is increase the annual cost to taxpayers. And the second approach that we took would be was to ask ourselves, what would the millage increase, the net millage increase, be such that the taxpayers were approximately in the same place as that $173 per 100,000 against a new home value. And had we looked at that option, or when we looked at that option, the district would be able to reduce its payment from approximately 37 years to approximately 29 years, save on the interest cost, but that would mean a larger annual tax payment for residents and over other taxpayers in the district. So in option two, that's what we're looking at, is the millage that would have been required to essentially keep taxpayers in the same place, about $173 per 100,000 in value, accounting for the new assessed valuations, and where that would have, how much that would allow the district to shorten its issue overall.
We should point out there are variations between these two options. You know, it's not either or, it's not the only two options that are available. There would be, you know, something in between these two options as far as potential repayment structure. For instance, could do a 35-year, repayment where it might require a little more millage than the option one, but less than option two. So there's, a number of options in between these two as well. But this kind of gives the two ends of the spectrum, so to speak. Number one being the option that is most like what was on the ballot when it comes to number of years repayment expected for the issue. Any questions on that?
So to my fellow board members, since this is the second time I've seen this, let me see if I can use layman terms to present this. So we approved or the voters approved the levy in November. The next step is then to, in essence, go out and get the mortgage. And then you want to do that at the lowest rate timing, which is what we're looking at now. But because to do this, we have a 1.5 to 2 year planning cycle. And then you draw 10% the first year and 30% the second year, and then 60% of the money the third year, right, when most of the construction's done. So we had that constraint with regard to timing, which is why he was talking about the taxable and the tax exempt. To take it all tax exempt, we would have to draw it down much faster than we're capable of doing, which is why we're looking at B, which is the breakup of the 205 million into two types of debt, tax exempt and taxable. Does that make sense to everybody? I can't see you anymore, so I can't tell if there's any quizzical looks. So, Brian Burrell, do you see what we're able to do because of the valuation increase is lower the millage, and the number that we're looking at is 3.51.
That makes sense. I appreciate the additional explanation for context.
Okay. Okay, I think this is great information. I know, Mike, did you have to already report to the auditor?
Yes, we did. The deadline was Friday in order to relay what that millage needed to be. So, we had to go with the 5.66 mils in total for bonds. And they are finalizing those millage calculations now for all other issues. So we should find out shortly what the new millage will be on all of our other outstanding levies shortly.
So the 5.66 will be adjusted based on the valuation, correct?
That will be the millage they will actually use. Because it would have gone on the ballot, or it would have gone on the duplicate at 4.93 additional mils, plus the 1.95 estimate for current outstanding debt. So the total would have been closer to 7. So we went with the 5.66 in order to make sure that the taxpayers get the benefit of the lower millage.
Good. All right. I think that's what we as a board wanted to make sure that the taxpayers had that advantage. So any other questions on that? Anything else that you want to cover, Marvin or Jordan?
No, I think that's it from us on that topic. We also wanted to touch, Mike mentioned, Mr. Berlingo mentioned the COPS issue. So if we're ready to move to that, we can. Okay. So as everyone knows, the other issue on the ballot that was approved was the PI levy at 1.5 mils for the purpose of issuing certificates of participation, and we refer to them as COPS acronym, against that revenue stream. in order to then have sufficient amount of debt limit. There's debt limit requirements that the district, that kept the district at the 205 million on the voted bond issue. So in order to increase the total amount available for the project that was needed, the other option was to have a PI levy that could fund a certificate of participation borrowing. In that regard, it's different than a bond issue in that the millage is set. The amount of revenue, I should say, more like it is set based on the 1.5 mils that was approved against the 2020 collection year AV. So that revenue is what we have to work with. When we signed for the next 30 years, that was also part of the ballot issue, the 1.5 mils for 30 years. To finance this part of the project. So when we sized that amount, we of course made certain assumptions about interest rates, collection rates, and coverage as far as over and above the amount expected for the debt payments in order to protect the school district if interest rates were to increase between the time that the ballot issue had to be placed on the ballot filed with the Board of Elections until the time came to actually sell the debt. If there was a change in interest rates, we wanted to help the district offset that risk a bit. So there is, because of current conditions, there is a possibility to fund a larger amount than what was first estimated from PI levy because of current market conditions. So positive in that regard. It's not restricted. The PI borrowing is not restricted to a dollar amount. And so for that reason, there's a discussion and a resolution that will be coming to the board to identify what that maximum amount could be. In the estimates, we calculated that the issue could be 44,335,000, which rounded out the total amount available for the project at $250 million, which was what was being estimated for the district at the time, by the district at the time, as being needed. But now we're here, and now there's a resolution coming to the board that needs a dollar amount in it for the authorization in order for the administration to move forward and to direct us to help the district move forward. So as we discussed today, there is a possibility that more than the 44,335 can be funded. And we calculate today on current interest rates that amount could be around between the 45 to 47 million. If rates were to decline by 0.25% from where we are today, approximately, that amount could get close to $50 million. So we need a little improvement in interest rates to get to the $50 million mark, but that obviously could happen. The upper range that we would say on the COPS issue would be that $50 million mark. We've also talked about interest rate risk. There's still that until we actually sell the COPS. If rates were to increase by, hopefully not this amount, but 100 basis points, then we would actually, the district would be in a situation where it could only fund about $40 to $42 million. And we've had that conversation really from the beginning, and that's the downside of using a certain amount of revenue over a 30-year period. You're still reliant upon where the interest rates are at the time you sell the debt to determine how much you can actually fund in that project. But that's the option at hand. So right now the district's sitting in a good spot, and I would give those as a range, as hopefully a minimum to a maximum. But in the resolution, it only requires the maximum authorization. So I would say that is a realistic amount for that is $50 million at this point.
I would also add to Marvin's comments quickly. we do anticipate that the COPS will be sold as tax exempt debt, not taxable debt, because it is a slightly higher cost of borrowing. So we would like to mitigate that by ensuring that they're tax exempt.
I have a question. I was thinking that there was a conversation that if we were to borrow, if rates dropped 0.25% and we borrowed 45 million and then they went down another 0.5%, the capacity to borrow that additional availability could happen in the future? Is that a statement?
Yes. Yeah. And I would say that, really, the decision to issue the amounts now is not required. In other words, there is an option to delay, a portion of either issuance, the tax exempt, the 205 million that was approved on the bond issue side, and the COPS issue to a later date. But then there's that interest rate risk, that the school district has to consider. The bond issue, the authorization on the bond issue will all be used up when $205,665,000 is issued. That will be done. On a COPS issue, on the PI levy, in the COPS issue, you have the ability to borrow against that revenue stream at any time. So if you have available revenue that you haven't used up, you'll still have the ability to borrow against that down the road.
The potential downside to that, though, Ms. Mooring, if we do borrow a significant portion and only there's a small amount that potentially could be borrowed in the future, it is potential that the cost of borrowing would be somewhat significant on $2 or $3 million. So it may not make it a good financial decision to borrow that amount of money.
Yeah, and also I think good financial practice. You have carryover balances in your general fund that you target that you like to have every year. In the bond retirement fund, we talk about the millage being collected. That also includes a contingency for carryover, an expectation for carryover balance, a targeted carryover balance. Say in the PI fund, you would want to the same thing, have a carryover balance because you'll have debt payments there for the coming years. And if there's a delay in collections or a decline in collections, you have those carryover balances. So that'll be something that we'll work with the district on as the debt is issued and try to plan that out or show that how that can be done.
Okay, so for my board members, on Thursday night, there's 2 resolutions in our board agenda. And one deals with COPS and one with the bonds. And so there'll be the dollar amount referenced in COPS. And I believe we're going to plug in 50 million to give us the most leeway. Is that your advice?
Up to 50 million.
Yeah, it'll say up to 50 million. Mm-hmm. And then with regard to the bonds, it will be the millage, right?
Correct.
Okay.
The other things that those resolutions do is basically authorize Mr. Barrett and myself to take all action necessary to issue the bonds and engage whatever parties, bond counsel, using Bricker and investment advisors, Baker Tilly. So those are the things that the resolutions effectively do.
And just so you know, when I had a meeting with the Baker Tilly and Mike and Steve, or was that last week? Gosh, I'm lost track of time. But, yes. We talked about how important it is to get an expected spending timeframe down. And so Steve, obviously is aware of that and is working on that. Mr. Barrett is aware of that and working on that. But by proceeding with the funding, it kind of starts the clock, so to speak. And so that I think is another notable storyline with regard to this whole discussion. Any other questions, especially for our professionals at Baker Tilly?
Appreciate you both coming and explaining and being willing to answer questions for us. I know we kind of went through this process, but on a much smaller scale, and not with that additional component when we did the last issue. But it also does feel like it's been 20 years since we had that conversation. So really appreciate that you're here tonight. Steve says too. Two feels like 20. Appreciate the conversation though before we have to take board action. So thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Marvin and Jordan. We appreciate you being here tonight.
Yes.
You're
Thank you.
welcome.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Have a good rest of the evening.
All right.
Yeah.
Thank
See
you.
ya. Bye.
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 Okay, before we go back to number 1 on the agenda, there is one other item kind of related to the debt issuance, and that's the post-issuance compliance policy that we are going to adopt on Thursday. What this basically does is outlines policies and procedures to promote compliance with federal income tax and securities laws. And it names the treasurer as disclosure officer, in addition to bond counsel, and the two of us then become what's called the continuing disclosure working group. And what this basically does is put a burden on me primarily as the officer to notify, there's a system, federal system in place where if any adverse conditions exist, that we need to report. For example, if your credit rating were to change, that has a material impact on the bonds that are out there in the market. So once we sell bonds, for example, there's a secondary market where people will trade those bonds. And depending upon movement in interest rates and interest in those particular bonds, and Gehanna has a very good credit rating currently at AA2, there will be a market for those bonds. If that rating dropped to AA3, that has an impact on the value of those bonds. And we're required to disclose that immediately and within a very short time frame. Likewise, relative to the financial condition of the district and the COPS issue. I mean, there could be adverse things that could occur sometime in the future, depending upon the condition of the district. So it places the burden on the treasurer to make sure that those things are disclosed in a timely manner. And that's what is being adopted. And it also applies to all of our current existing debt. So we will need to do a review of all that debt to make sure that there are no potential issues with what's outstanding today.
So is that in the current agenda that we have to review?
It is on the board agenda, yes.
Okay.
There's a resolution to adopt the policy.
Okay. And should that have gone through the policy committee first, or is it totally a ORC kind of policy that we would refer to?
It's more of a federal,
Oh, it's federal.
federal law, SEC law requirement.
Okay.
I understand that we had not adopted this in the past, but now that we're issuing new debt, we kind of must adopt it in addition to, or in order to be able to sell the bonds. So I did send it over to Mr. Campbell last week and just mentioned that, hey, here's a policy that we will need to be adopting.
Super. Thank you. Are you going to pop back up to number 1 and start?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay, let me see if I can share screen. Contract summaries. Oh, it's not there. Okay. Okay, I think it worked. All right, so just quickly review the November results. Cash balances are still above prior year levels. And we'll review kind of like the cash investments here towards the end. Receipts for the month were slightly higher than estimates versus prior year, $500,000 higher, and we'll go over that chart. Receipts are continuing to trend higher, primarily for TIF and tax abatement settlements. We did get a large settlement in this first half of the year. We kind of discussed last month related to Easton, and there was another settlement payment that came in for about $200,000, which is an annual payment for some back taxes that were being collected. We're still hopeful that there will not be a large impact on receipts. We do have a hedge built into the forecast and estimates due to COVID and potential reduction in the amount of taxes that will be collected in the second half. And then there was something new that happened this past month, House Bill 751. And I understand that it was passed, which will have a negative impact on property values because they are allowing challenges related to valuations on businesses based on the COVID virus. So to the extent that your revenues are impacted, they're potentially going to be granting reductions in valuations. And since the valuations have already been recalculated, the millage has been recalculated based upon the increase in assessed values, we will see a larger hit because House Bill 920 has already basically been incorporated into the calculations. So if someone receives a reduction in home value, or I'm sorry, business valuation, that we'll see a larger hit in tax collections from that. It's supposed to be for a couple of year period. So to the extent that occurs, we'll need to be tracking that. On the expenditure side, 900,000 under prior year amounts. Wages and benefits increased as the adjustments for the retro pay and those things have been processed. There is still more of that to be processed in the month of December. So in effect, things will catch up versus the estimates. And right now, the estimate for the full fiscal year, we're running maybe 100 to 200,000 underestimate on the salary and wage side of things, except we potentially estimate there might be a higher level of retirements. And retirements, there are payouts that occur when that happens, and that may exceed the normal reserve that we anticipate on an annual basis. So we could see increased separation pay versus the cost savings, and hopefully that'll net out so that there really will not be a negative impact to the forecast. There are some appropriation adjustments that are being requested. The broadband connectivity grant, we have a reduction there because we originally estimated and requested upgrade in meta connectivity. That was denied. I did speak with Mr. Blackwell, and he basically thought that anything other than the specific hotspots and certain things that were being requested was denied for that grant. We originally put it in there, but then we're now basically backing it out. The good thing was that he was able to get E-rate discounts, and we did save about 50% in E-rate discounts. So not an entire loss of the 46,000, but thanks to Mr. Blackwell, we were able to file that and get the refunds. These next two items, the establishment of the new club is actually number 5 on the agenda, but they're looking to create a STEM skills club with mechanics and programming, socialization, etc., hand-eye coordination, and that is in the process of being created.
Yeah, this is kind of a cool club. You want me to talk about it a little bit, Mike? Or
Sure.
It's going to be on our agenda on Thursday, or it is on our agenda, and the purpose is to have a inclusive club that allows for special education and regular education kids to collaborate around STEM skills and mechanics and programming, the use of hand power tools, teaching kids how to fix things, building scale models, doing different kinds of designs and fabrications with parts, and also the socialization that'll come that will benefit both special education and general education peers. But one benefit, especially for special education kids, will be the practice with hand-eye coordination and gross and fine motor skills. So grateful to a special education teacher at the high school, Jordan Kessler, for leading this effort. And we wanted to have it on the agenda to talk about tonight because often we have these things on agendas, but we don't get a chance to kind of share how neat they really are. So kudos to Jordan. I think it's going to be a great club for kids. Thanks, Mike.
Mike, can you just also remind people that last month at Finance Committee, we talked about the fact that the general fund would need an additional appropriation of 1.3 million. That is on Thursday night's agenda. And I just don't want anybody to think that we didn't have a discussion about it again tonight.
Yes, we did discuss that last month. It related to special education, placement of students in programs. It also related to PPE. So there were items that we had discussed last month, but it was not actually voted on. So we're adding it to this agenda. Also included 400,000 for autism and Peterson Scholarship, which are deductions that come off of our foundation funding. So to the extent more students or more parents are using that vehicle to send their kids to private programs, then we have a deduction off of our foundation. And it's estimated that we'll be seeing more of that. So that's why we increased the appropriation. Those items are also built into the forecast. I gotta see if I can change the orientation here. There we go.
Look at you, Mike. You're becoming a pro.
I'm becoming yeah, now I got to figure out how to make it larger.
We're all, it's a little plus button at the bottom, Mike. We're all a little impressed by the reorientation though. That was impressive. So there, see the plus button it would be on the right-hand side of your screen. If you just hit that a couple times, it'll make it bigger.
Yeah, I don't see the plus button though on my screen.
It's probably hidden by our pictures because it's over on the right.
That could be. Sorry about that. Now,
If you go to view at the top, Mike, you can minimize your us on the screen and you might be able to see it.
I
There you go.
jinxed you. I apologize.
I just lost what I was showing. Yeah, it must have been hidden. So then I clicked on something and now I'm trying to find what was there before. Sorry. No.
Isn't it the tab to the left of the one that's open? You go to your top.
Oh, resume share. No, that's the debt. Here we go.
There you go.
Okay, that's the summary. There we go. All right, so you're saying it's hidden behind here. There we go. You're right, it was hidden. Okay. It's great when it works, but then when I do something different, I'm not familiar enough with it to recover quickly. So if we look at November year-to-date revenues versus estimates in the center of the page, we're about $500,000 above estimates from taxes, and that's because the collections were better than we expected. The tax abatement revenue, again, that's a large piece of the increase. And offsetting fees, we've talked about that before, where we expect fees to be down significantly for the year. Foundation is still running ahead because, again, last year we saw the cut at the end of the year. So by end of the year, that'll catch up and basically be on target. So we're up 1.8 million in revenues over estimates, and we're up about $500,000 over prior year.
Can you speak to the non-operating revenue and the other, that 448, 187?
Yeah, the 400, that was basically, we had a run out reserve that was related to the self-insurance fund.
Oh, right.
So the board basically funded that over the years. And it goes back decades. So when we received the refund, when I transferred the money back from the account that it was in, we recognized that as prior year refund of receipt, or I'm sorry, reduction of expenditure. 20% of that was put into the insurance fund. So about 100 and some thousand was added to the self-insurance fund as the potential employee contributions towards that amount.
I guess so. So we also received a similar amount in October.
No, we received that in October, nothing in November. So year to date.
Oh, gotcha.
448.
Gotcha.
So that was not anticipated. That was new money. And then on the expenditure side, year to date, we are under running salaries and wage estimates again, but I project out when we catch up with everything, we should be relatively close. Benefits again, mostly for timing. What we are seeing in purchase services and some of the other items, not so much capital and supplies, but we are underrunning what the estimates would be. For example, fuel, electricity, gas, those kind of things related to normal operations, since we've kind of been in either hybrid or remote learning. So we do expect to see some savings. So the run rates are under projection. And I would expect that we will have savings there for the whole year. But overall, we're effectively, there's nothing I see currently that is a huge red flag in spending or in the revenue side. So I think overall we're pretty much on target. Okay, the history, again, this kind of just gets updated, for 21 year to date. You can see that local sources are typically been increasing. Again, it's the same story that we historically have seen and probably will continue to do so as more and more burden is shifted onto local sources of revenues. I added another chart this month, which basically breaks out spending year to date by fund, the total expended versus our appropriation, and give you a feel for how we're tracking in all the funds. If you look at 5 months worth of activity, we should be at about 41% in the general fund, and we're tracking at 39.1. All of these other funds can vary, mostly based upon timing of when some of the things occur. For the most part, there aren't any issues that I see here. Most of it is tracking normally. Some of the, for example, termination benefits, this is the one line where we potentially could see going over, depending upon the number of retirees we have. Bond retirement fund. This is higher because the debt payments have mostly all occurred for this year. Except in June, we do have a lot of interest payments. PI and the building fund, I do expect building fund to be mostly exhausted by the end of July. Or end of June, we should have spent the majority of that money as the construction project is completed. And Rotary Services is high due to that's summer school activity. So again, nothing here that I see alarming or potential problem. Cash balances, again, we're mostly invested 100% roughly in most everything. Heartland Bank, there's a typo here, that 20.2 basis points, 20 basis points is actually 25. That was an error when I made up the chart. I failed to correct that. So that's really, we're getting 25 basis points on the Heartland money market currently versus Star Ohio, which is down to 14, and that continues to drop since interest rates are so low. The other investments here. CDs is fairly high compared to anything else, and that's because we have some longer term CDs yielding 2 to 3 to 4%. And Red Tree is the construction fund. You can see we'll be using up most all of that this fiscal year. So 15 million or so estimated to be used up. And that's a summary of CD investments. You can see 2.8, 2.53% or so, which in today's market, you're getting nowhere near anything like that. We're getting like 22 basis points on a 2-year CD that was rolled over.
So Mike, are you saying that on Lincoln Elementary's project, the money that we hadn't spent yet, we invested, and I think it was like the interest was about 1.2 million on that?
Yes.
And you're saying that since interest, there's no way we would get anywhere near that right now? Is that what you just said? You implied?
Well, the money, if we had funds to invest today,
yeah,
we'd be getting nowhere near the returns
right.
were collected over the last 2 years when the initial bonds were sold for that project.
Right.
So we did benefit at that time by having that money invested over.
That helped us.
It helped us quite a bit. You know, they continue to keep dropping because as we need those funds to pay the bills are coming in now at, 2 to 3 to 4 million a month. Be drawing money out of here.
Right. But when we go out for the new bond, though, we'll benefit because interest rates will be low. So we'll benefit on that end of things. Hopefully they stay low by the time we go out.
We'd be paying much less interest on those bonds than we did on those 2 years ago.
Right.
Okay, so I need to stop sharing. The next item was the transfer PI. Well, any questions on financials? So the next item, the transfer, we have a tax anticipation note that was funded from the PI fund. And the debt service on that for this fiscal year is $831,700. So you're being asked to approve the transfer from the PI fund to the debt service fund to make the payment that's required. And that'll be on this agenda. There's about 3 more years, I believe. If I look at the debt schedule, there's about 3 more years on that tax anticipation note before that would be paid off. And then we have some other debt, maybe next month, given that we're selling significant number of bonds and COPs, we can review the debt schedule again to kind of see where we are in total. Next item was purchase service contract summary. So share. Okay, one of the things that in terms of spending for the district, can you see the screen? Can everyone see the spreadsheet?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So contracted services are a fairly large part of our expenditures. If you look at the 400 grouping of object codes versus 500, which is supplies. So 400 is purchase services. There's quite a number of contracts that we enter into on an annual basis or on a multi-year basis. What I've compiled was we went back to fiscal year 19 and 20, and we compiled a list of all those contracts that appeared on board agendas. And basically an explanation as to what they were, what the term was, what fund they are financed by, and then a description of what that fund is. So some of this comes out of grants, some of it is general fund, etc. So we have the 1920. For fiscal year 21, we're doing the same analysis, and then we are adding in those items here that have yet to be approved. So like the ones in blue, we have not actually put on an agenda at this time. So we need to look at, well, was that a one-time contract? Is it something that we need to continue, etc. And when you look at a summary of the activity, I can open that up. Here we go. On a fund basis, you can see what the contracts are and who the vendor is and what the amounts were in order to kind of just give us a summary of all the activity. And then what we will look to start doing is analyze each of these, kind of determine, since we're building a history here of what the trend is, what we potentially could go out to bid for, especially the higher dollar items. So you can see that some of the contracts are hundreds of thousands of dollars. Others are relatively small. But to the extent it's a larger contract, we're going to want to look at that more closely and determine if there's other potential vendors in association with whatever group usually contracts for that service. So it just gives us another thing to look at and analyze in a way to maybe potentially lower costs.
Do we have this spreadsheet?
Do you have a
Daphne's saying
spreadsheet?
no.
No,
Yeah.
I have not. I have not sent this out.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
It's
something that we've been working on internally. And I wanted to get it to a point where it would have some meaningful information as opposed to just a list of contracts. So if you'd like, we can start updating this or providing it on a monthly or quarterly basis.
It's really more of a working document that
Yeah.
that Mike and Steve can use, and Steve, with his direct reports, to be able to see, what contracts are coming due in a year or 2 years, I think, and help us to make sure we're managing the contracts versus having them come up and having to respond. So we talked about, Mike and I talked about this, and I thought it was a great way to get ahead of some of these things, especially as we're managing such varied projects and things like that. So
that makes sense. I think that was my question. So is this information compiled in communication with the people who are, I guess,
the spenders
negotiating the contracts?
Spenders,
Yeah. Yes.
At this point, it's just a summary of the activity. The next step would be to start looking at each of the contracts and then discussing it with the people who would be involved in negotiating them or working to for the service, and then see if there are other options as opposed to going to the same vendor year after year. Are there ways that or other vendors out there that can provide similar service for lower cost? Not always the case, and not all services are equal. So depending upon the level of service, you tend to pay more.
Hey, my question on this is there anywhere to put like, just looking at Genesis and a number, it really doesn't tell you anything what the service is, what is being provided. So even if it's just one word or a category type, whether it's IT, I know you have it in general and auxiliary,
Yeah.
things of that nature, but it still doesn't really say what is being what we're contracting for. I
Yeah,
know the people that are spending the money, they understand.
Mhm.
But to me, just looking at some of these names and numbers, it really doesn't.
I'm trying to get back to that sheet or that part that we do. Here we go. So if you look at the detail, this is the detailed sheet.
Okay.
For example, Ability Matters, $49,000. It was on September board agenda for the fiscal year. It's the placement of a student in a program. And it's funded out of the IDEA grant. So it's not tax funds. This is the detailed sheet. This other
we got collapsed. I just saw when really was paying attention when everything collapsed into these summary sheets.
Okay, yeah, this is just the summary. So yeah, we're trying to capture as much information about each contract in the sheet, and then, like I said, we'll go to each group or department and at least have a discussion about it, especially when it comes to budgeting.
I like it. I think it'll be a good tool for you and Steve to use in managing the district.
Okay, thanks. All right, so let me stop sharing. Okay. So I think we've covered most everything. We covered the new club and the amendments to the appropriations and revenues. We talked about the transfer. So
what about the correction of minutes?
There was Mr. Campbell sent an email that there was potentially a vote that was recorded incorrectly. So the minutes reflected a 5-0 vote, and he indicated that he thought it was 4-1. So I've asked my assistant to go back and review the tape of the meeting to make sure that, either we had it correct or it was incorrectly posted in the minutes. And that to me would be a kind of a typographical error. I don't think it needs to be voted on. If it was just a recording error where we wrote down or the wrong thing, I'm not sure if that needs to be actually voted on to be corrected.
Yeah, I think it would be good to double check that. I guess what's going through my head, I understand what you're saying, and I agree that it sounds like it was a clerical error. I'm just concerned because we did vote to approve the minutes. So if we could, I guess if there's a way to just double check that we don't need to take board action to make the change, that would be good.
Okay. Yeah, the first thing is to review the tape and make sure that either we made an error in recording it or whether it was correct. And then after that, yeah, we can always have it approved again with the correction.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not saying that it needs to be. I just would like us to check with just to make sure. I mean, in my mind, I think it would need to be voted on again, but I don't know that with certainty. So.
Okay. And I think lastly, I am going to mention this just because it is going to be on the agenda on Thursday. The district is receiving a gift of 30 acres of land that is adjacent to High Point Elementary School. It's a wooded area, and we will be voting to accept the gift. And I believe the resolution or receipt of gifts should be out to us for review, but very generous donation by Tom and Ellen Tripp. So that will be on Thursday's agenda as well.
Daphne or Mrs. Mooring, is Mr. Tripp going to be joining us at the meeting on Thursday?
He is.
Okay,
Mhm.
okay,
Mhm.
thanks.
Okay. Okay. Any other items for discussion? It has been a full plate. So thank you for staying with us through all these numbers and bonds and COPs and all kinds of things that we don't normally deal with. So with that, we will adjourn the meeting at 8:40 or 7:46. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Good night. Good night.